She stood frozen at the edge of the marble steps, her breath shaking, her hands clenched so tightly they hurt. Across the courtyard, a man in a faded garbage collector's uniform was shoved backward by security, his boots scraping against the stone as laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. "So this is the husband you chose," Ramata Toure didn't move. She only watched him. Issa Ouattara rise slowly, dust himself off and lift his eyes. There was no anger there, no shame, just a calm that didn't belong to a poor man being humiliated. And in that quiet look, something dangerous waited to be revealed. Before we begin the story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Long before the marble steps and the laughter, long before anyone pointed and sneered, Ramata Toure lived a life that rarely drew attention. She woke every morning before sunrise in a narrow rented room on the outskirts of the city. The walls were thin, the ceiling stained from old leaks, but the room was always clean. Ramata believed cleanliness was a kind of dignity no one could take from you. She swept the floor carefully, folded her clothes neatly, and said a short prayer before stepping outside. By 6:30, she was already walking toward the small public primary school where she taught. The children loved her, not because she had the best books or the newest chalk, but because she listened. She noticed when a child was hungry, when one was quiet for too long, when another tried too hard to act grown. Teaching didn't make Ramata rich, but it gave her purpose. And for a long time, that felt like enough. Her mother, Madame Fatou Toure, didn't agree. "Purpose doesn't pay rent," Fatou liked to say, sitting with her arms crossed whenever Ramata visited. "A woman needs security, a husband who can provide." Ramata's father, Mamadou Toure, usually stayed silent during these conversations. He would stare at the floor, nodding slightly as if agreeing with both sides and neither at the same time. "Ramata is still young," he would murmur. "There is time." Fatou would scoff. "Time for what? To wake up poor every day. Look at Aminata." Aminata Diallo, Ramata's cousin, was Fatou's favorite example, married to Boubacar. Diallo, a man who loved shiny cars and loud suits, Aminata never missed a chance to remind everyone how well she was doing. Her photos flooded social media, fancy restaurants, weekend trips, expensive gifts. Fatou pointed at those photos as if they were proof of something holy. "That is success." Ramata would lower her eyes and say nothing. She had learned that arguing only made things worse. The truth was, Ramata had loved before. Karim Mensah had been her first serious relationship. He was charming, ambitious, and endlessly concerned with how things looked. When they were together, he spoke often about the future, but always in numbers, salary, position, connections. At first, Ramata admired his drive, but slowly his compliments turned into criticisms. "You're too comfortable," he once told her. "Teaching children is fine, but don't you want more?" She had smiled gently. "I want peace." Karim didn't smile back. When his career began to improve, he began to disappear. Fewer calls, shorter messages. Then one evening he sat across from her and cleared his throat. "I think we want different things," he said carefully. "I need someone who matches where I'm going." Ramata understood what he didn't say. She was being left behind. She cried that night quietly into her pillow, but by morning she wiped her face, dressed for work, and went on with her life. That was how Ramata survived pain. She didn't let it stop her. Months passed, then years, and then came the morning she met Issa Ouattara. It was a humid Tuesday, the kind where the air clung to your skin. Ramata was running late, hurrying down a narrow street with her bag pressed against her side. A truck was parked awkwardly near the corner, blocking part of the road. As she tried to squeeze past, her foot caught on something and she stumbled. She didn't fall. A firm hand caught her arm. "Careful," a deep voice said. Ramata looked up and found herself face to face with a man wearing a faded green uniform. His boots were worn, his gloves patched in places. Behind him were large bins and the unmistakable smell of waste. A garbage collector. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, embarrassed. "I wasn't watching." "It's all right," he replied. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "The street is not forgiving," she smiled despite herself. "That's a nice way to put it." He nodded once, then released her arm. "Have a good day." "You too," she said, already turning away. She thought that would be the end of it, but the next week she saw him again, and the week after that. Always in the morning, always near the same streets, moving with quiet focus as he worked. Sometimes their eyes met, sometimes they nodded to each other, nothing more. Until one morning the rain came suddenly. Ramada stood under a small awning waiting for it to slow. The street emptied quickly except for one person, Isa. He worked through the rain, soaked within minutes, lifting bins, pushing carts, his movement steady and uncomplaining. Ramada watched him, something tightening in her chest. When he finally passed near her, she stepped forward without thinking. "Wait," she called. He turned, rain dripping from his brow. "You'll get sick working like this," she said. He smiled faintly. "If I stop, the work doesn't disappear." She hesitated, then held out a small plastic bag. Inside was a meat pie she had bought for lunch. "Please," she said softly, "at least take this." He looked at the bag, then at her. For a moment she thought he would refuse. Instead, he nodded. "Thank you," he said. "That's kind. I'm Ramada. Isa." That was how it began. They started talking briefly at first. A few words here, a smile there, then longer conversations. Ramada learned that Isa lived simply, that he valued honesty, that he believed work, no matter how humble, was honorable. Isa learned that Ramada taught children that she loved stories, that she often put others before herself. He never asked her for anything. Not money, not favors, not pity. That more than anything set him apart. Soon people began to notice. "Why do you keep talking to that man?" a neighbor whispered one afternoon. A garbage collector, another, scoffed. "Ramada, you can do better." Even Fatu heard rumors. One evening she confronted her daughter. "Is it true you're spending time with a man who collects trash?" Ramada met her mother's eyes. "His name is Isa." Fatu shook her head in disbelief. "Have you lost your mind?" "No," Ramada said quietly. "I've found my peace." Fatu laughed bitterly. "Peace doesn't feed a family." Ramada said nothing. She had heard that line before. What Fatu and everyone else didn't see was the way Isa listened when Ramada spoke, the way he never rushed her words, the way he treated her like she mattered even on days when she felt invisible to the world. For the first time in a long time, Ramada felt seen. And that feeling was about to change her life forever. At first, Ramada didn't tell anyone how often she spoke to Isa. Not because she was ashamed, but because she knew how people listened with judgment already formed, with conclusions waiting to be spoken. So she kept those moments for herself, the short conversations before work, the shared smiles, the quiet understanding that grew without effort. Isa never pushed for more. If Ramada was late, he didn't ask why. If she seemed tired, he didn't demand explanations. He simply noticed. One morning she arrived at their usual corner with her shoulders slumped and her eyes dull. Isa paused his work when he saw her. "Long night?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. "One of my students fainted in class yesterday. Hunger. The school sent her home, but I couldn't stop thinking about her." Isa listened without interrupting, his hands resting on the handle of his cart. "You carry a lot," he said finally. Ramada sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if it's too much." Isa studied her face for a moment. "The world needs people who carry things others drop." She looked at him surprised. "You speak like a philosopher," she said with a small smile. He shrugged. "Life teaches if you pay attention." That day, Ramada walked to work lighter than she had in weeks. But not everyone saw what she saw. The neighbors began to whisper more openly. A few women at the market exchanged looks when Ramada passed. Someone laughed loudly one afternoon and said, "Teacher Ramada has found herself a garbage king." Ramada heard it. She felt the sting. But she kept walking. Zainab Kone, her closest friend, noticed the change before anyone else. They sat together one evening outside Ramada's room, sharing roasted corn. "You've been smiling more," Zainab said. "And you're quieter. That usually means something." Ramada smiled faintly. "I've been talking to someone." Zainab raised an eyebrow. "Talking, yes. Who?" Ramada hesitated, then decided not to lie. "His name is Isa. He works with the city sanitation team." Zainab didn't laugh. She didn't scoff. She only nodded slowly. "And how does he treat you?" she asked. With respect, Ramada replied without thinking. Zainab smiled. "Then I don't see the problem." Ramada exhaled in relief. "Everyone else does. Everyone else doesn't live your life," Zainab said firmly. That simple support meant more than Ramada realized at the time. As weeks passed, Isa and Ramada's conversations grew longer. Sometimes he walked with her part of the way to school before returning to his route. Sometimes she waited a few minutes after work just to see him pass by. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the street gold, Isa surprised her. "Would you like to sit for a while?" he asked. "There's a small place nearby." Ramada hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because she could already hear her mother's voice in her head. Still, she nodded. I'd like that. They sat on plastic chairs outside a tiny roadside cafe. Isa ordered tea for both of them. When the vendor handed him the cups, Ramada noticed how carefully he counted his money. You didn't have to, she said softly. I wanted to, he replied. They talked about small things at first work. Whether favorite childhood memories. Isa spoke little about himself, but when he did, his words were thoughtful, measured. I grew up believing that your work should never define your worth, he said at one point, but the world doesn't always agree. Ramada nodded. It doesn't. Does it bother you, he asked, what people say? She looked at him. Really looked. It bothers me when people think they know me without asking. Isa smiled. Then we are alike. From that day on, their connection became harder to ignore. Fatou noticed. One evening, she cornered Ramada in the kitchen. You come home later these days. I stop to talk sometimes. Ramada replied carefully. To Isa. Fatou slammed the pot she was holding onto the stove. I warned you. People are talking. People always talk, Ramada said quietly. This is different, Fatou snapped. Do you want to become a joke? Do you want your cousin Aminata laughing behind your back? Ramada met her mother's gaze. She already does. Fatou opened her mouth, then closed it again. You are throwing your life away. Ramada didn't raise her voice. I'm choosing it. That night, Fatou cried in her room. Mamadou said nothing, and Ramada lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how love could feel both so peaceful and so heavy at the same time. The next confrontation came from a place Ramada hadn't expected. Karim Mensah returned. She ran into him outside a small shopping center one afternoon. He looked sharper than she remembered new clothes. Confident posture, the air of a man who believed he was winning at life. Ramada, he said, surprised. It's been a long time. She nodded politely. Hello, Karim? They spoke briefly, exchanging updates. Then Karim's eyes drifted past her toward the street. That's him, isn't it? He asked suddenly. She frowned. What? The man you've been seen with? He said, lowering his voice. The garbage collector. Ramada's back straightened. His name is Isa. Karim chuckled. Of course it is. She felt heat rise in her chest. What do you want, Karim? He sighed dramatically. I don't understand you. You had potential. You could have done better. Better than respect, she asked. Karim's smile faded slightly. Be serious. I am, Ramada replied. He shook his head. You're making a mistake. Then it's mine to make, she said, and walked away. That evening, Isa noticed her mood immediately. Someone upset you, he said. She hesitated, then told him everything. When she finished, she waited for anger, for insecurity, for defensiveness. Instead, Isa nodded slowly. People fear what they don't understand. And does it hurt you? She asked softly. He met her eyes. Only when it hurts you. Something shifted in Ramada then. Something deep and certain. She realized that Isa didn't just accept who she was, he protected it. By the end of that week, the whispers had grown louder, the judgments harsher. Even children at school repeated things they'd heard at home. But Ramada no longer walked with her head down, because for the first time, she wasn't choosing love in spite of fear. She was choosing it because of courage. And Isa Ouattara was no longer just a man she talked to on the street. He was becoming the man she trusted with her heart. The rumors didn't slow down. They multiplied. What began as quiet whispers soon turned into bold opinions delivered without shame. Ramada heard them in the market and the school courtyard, even in the tone of voices that suddenly changed when she walked past. She's educated, yet she chose a garbage collector. What kind of future can come from that? Love doesn't pay bills. Ramada learned to recognize the look people gave her, half pity, half judgment. Some smiled too quickly. Others didn't bother to hide their disapproval. Each time she reminded herself why she woke up every morning with a steady heart. Isa. One afternoon, as Ramada was leaving school, she saw a familiar car parked across the street. Polished, expensive, out of place. Karim Mensah stepped out, adjusting his watch as if he wanted the world to notice it. Ramada he called, smiling as though they were old friends meeting by chance. She stopped but didn't step closer. Karim. I heard you teach here, he said, glancing around. Still. Yes, she replied calmly. Still. He nodded, then leaned slightly against his car. "We should talk." "There's nothing to talk about," she said. Kareem smiled, but there was impatience behind it. "People say things. I thought it was just gossip, but then I saw you. With him." Ramada folded her arms. And I don't understand," he said. "You're smarter than this." Her eyes hardened. "You don't get to decide what this is." Kareem laughed softly. "You think he can take care of you? A man who spends his days picking up other people's waste?" "That man," Ramada said evenly, "treats me better than you ever did." Kareem's smile vanished. "You're being emotional," he said. "I came to help you, to warn you. Warn me of what she asked, of regret." She shook her head. "I already know what regret feels like." Kareem stared at her stunned. Then he straightened. "When this ends badly, don't say I didn't try." He got into his car and drove away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and something bitter in the air. That evening, Ramada told Issa about the encounter. They sat on a low wall near his route, the sky turning purple as the day faded. "He thinks I'm making a mistake," she said quietly. Issa listened, hands resting on his knees. "Do you?" She didn't hesitate. "No." He looked at her, then really looked. "Then his opinion doesn't matter." She smiled, but her eyes were tired. "It's not just him. My family's getting louder." Issa nodded. Families often confuse fear with wisdom. The real storm came 2 days later. Fatu invited Ramada to dinner. The invitation alone felt heavy. When Ramada arrived, she saw that the table was set for more people than usual. Aminata Diallo was there. So was her husband Boubacar. Aminata barely waited for Ramada to sit before she began, so she said, swirling her drink. "It's true." Ramada kept her voice steady. "What is you and the garbage collector?" Aminata said, laughing. "I thought it was a joke." Fatu sighed loudly. "Aminata, please." "No," Auntie Aminata continued. "Someone needs to talk sense into her." Boubacar leaned back in his chair smirking. "Does he even own a proper shirt?" Ramada felt her chest tighten. "His name is Issa." "And what does Issa own?" Aminata asked sweetly. "A broom." Fatu looked at Ramada. "Tell them you're not serious." Ramada pushed her chair back slightly. "I am serious." The room fell silent. "You're embarrassing this family?" Fatu said, her voice trembling with anger. "Do you know what people say about us?" "What about what I feel?" Ramada asked softly. Fatu slammed her hand on the table. "Feelings fade. Poverty doesn't." Mamadou cleared his throat. "Let her speak." Fatu turned on him. "And you too? You want your daughter to suffer?" Ramada stood. "I'm already suffering, just not the way you think." Aminata scoffed. "You'll come crying when reality hits." Ramada looked at her cousin calmly. "Reality already hit me once. I survived." She left before anyone could stop her. That night she cried. Not because she doubted her choice, but because choosing it cost so much. Issa found her the next morning sitting on the steps outside her building, eyes swollen. "They went too far," he said quietly. She nodded. "They always do." He sat beside her without touching her, giving her space. "Ramada," he said after a moment, "if this becomes too heavy, you don't owe me anything." She turned to him sharply. "Don't say that. I mean it," he said gently. "I won't be the reason you're torn apart." She stared at him, tears spilling over. "You're not tearing me apart. They are." He showed no relief, no triumph, only concern. "Then let me be clear," she said, wiping her face. "I choose you, not because you're perfect, but because you're honest, because you see me." Issa inhaled slowly as if weighing something. "Then I should be honest too," he said. Her heart skipped. "About what?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet." Something in his tone told her this wasn't fear, it was restraint. The next few days tested her resolve. At school, a parent complained that Ramada was a bad example. At the market, a vendor joked loudly about her career downgrade. Even Kareem's mother, Yvonne Mensah, stopped her one afternoon. "You could have been my daughter-in-law," Yvonne said coldly. "Instead, you chose shame." Ramada met her gaze. "I chose peace." Yvonne laughed sharply. "Peace doesn't last." That evening, Ramada walked longer than usual, her mind heavy. She found Issa finishing his route under a flickering streetlight. "I don't know how much longer I can fight everyone," she admitted. Issa wiped his hands on a cloth. "You're not fighting everyone. You're standing for yourself." She looked at him, exhausted. "Is that enough?" He stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "It has to be." She searched his face. There was no promise of wealth there, no guarantee of comfort. But there was steadiness. There was truth. And in a world that demanded proof in money and status, Ramada chose to believe that truth still mattered. What she didn't know was that the people mocking her were standing at the edge of a revelation, one that would soon force them to confront how wrong they had been. The proposal didn't happen the way people expected. There was no ring hidden in food, no crowd, no speech meant to impress anyone. It happened on an ordinary evening after one of the hardest days Ramada had faced in weeks. She had come home late, her body tired, her spirit bruised. At school, a parent had openly questioned her moral example in front of the head teacher. At the market, she overheard two women laughing, their words sharp and careless. By the time she reached the small open space where Isa usually waited for her, she felt hollow. Isa noticed immediately. "You're carrying stones again," he said quietly. She tried to smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "They're getting heavier." They sat on the low concrete bench near the road. Traffic passed. Voices echoed. Life went on around them. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Isa reached into his pocket. Ramada stiffened slightly, not knowing why. He pulled out a small, folded cloth worn at the edges. He unfolded it carefully and placed it between them. Inside was a simple ring, thin, plain, no shine that caught the light. "Isa," she whispered. He didn't rush. He didn't kneel dramatically. He simply looked at her, his voice steady but low. "I don't have much," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise. I can't promise you ease or admiration from the world." Her chest tightened. "But I can promise you this." He continued, "I will stand with you when they laugh. I will walk beside you when they turn away, and I will never make you feel small." Ramada's eyes filled with tears. "I don't ask you to marry my position," Isa said softly. "I ask you to marry me." For a moment the noise of the street faded. There was only her breath unsteady and the weight of the choice before her. She thought of her mother's tears, her cousin's laughter, Kareem's smug warnings, the whispers that followed her like shadows. Then she thought of mornings that felt lighter because of Isa's words, of being seen without being measured, of peace. "Yes," she said. Isa's breath left him slowly as if he'd been holding it for weeks. He smiled, not wide, not triumphant, but relieved. When Ramada told her family, the reaction was exactly what she feared. Fatou cried openly. "You're throwing your life away," she said. "For what?" "For a man who cannot lift you, he lifts me every day." Ramada replied quietly. "With what?" Fatou demanded. "Love. Love won't feed children." Ramada didn't raise her voice. "Neither will bitterness." Mamadou tried to mediate. "Let's not rush. Engagement is not marriage." But Aminata had already heard. She arrived uninvited the next afternoon, her face glowing with something close to excitement. "So it's official," she said, clapping slowly. "My cousin engaged to a garbage collector." Ramada stood her ground. "Yes." Aminata leaned closer. "You'll regret this." Maybe, Ramada replied, "but it will be my regret." Aminata laughed. "At least invite us to the wedding. I'd love to see what poverty looks like dressed in white." The wedding planning was painful. There was no help from family, no contributions. Fatou refused to attend at first, then reluctantly agreed after Mamadou pleaded. Even then she made it clear she would not celebrate. Isa insisted on keeping things simple. "We don't need to prove anything," he told Ramada, "only to each other." They chose a small community hall, a borrowed sound system. A modest dress, Ramada altered herself. Isa wore a clean but old suit pressed carefully the night before. On the day of the wedding, whispers filled the room before the ceremony even began. "Look at him. She could have done better. This won't last." Ramada heard them all. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted her veil. Then she saw Isa waiting at the front. He stood straight, his shoulders squared, his expression calm. When their eyes met, something steadied inside her. As she walked down the short aisle, Aminata whispered loudly to Boubacar, "This is embarrassing." Boubacar chuckled. "Let's see how long love lasts without money." Fatou sat stiffly, her face tight, her eyes wet but unreadable. When Ramada reached Isa, he took her hands. His grip was warm, certain. The vows were simple. "I choose you," Ramada said, her voice trembling but clear. In truth, in struggle, in hope. Isa's voice didn't waver. "I choose you, always." When they were pronounced husband and wife, applause came, but it was thin, hesitant, mixed with silence. At the small reception afterward, the mockery became less subtle. Aminata raised her glass. "To love," she said loudly, "may it survive reality." Some laughed, others looked away uncomfortable. Isa said nothing. That night Ramada cried not from regret but from release. The tension of holding her ground for so long finally broke. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Isa as they sat alone later. "For everything they said." He shook his head. "They weren't speaking to me. They were speaking to their own fear. Their early married life was not easy. Money was tight. They budgeted carefully. Some days Ramada skipped small comforts without mentioning it. Isa woke before dawn and returned exhausted. Yet there was peace. They ate together, talked about their days, laughed quietly over small jokes only they understood. But the world didn't stop watching. At school, Ramada felt eyes on her ring. Some parents withdrew their children. Others openly questioned her choices. One afternoon, Kareem appeared again, shaking his head in disbelief. "You actually married him," he said. "Unbelievable." "Yes," Ramada replied. Kareem smirked. "When it falls apart, remember you chose this." That evening, Ramada came home shaken. Isa listened, then said gently, "If at any point you wish you had chosen differently, tell me." She looked at him, hurt flashing in her eyes. "Don't you dare doubt what I chose." He smiled faintly. "I don't. I just respect you enough to give you freedom." Freedom. That word stayed with her. As days turned into weeks, the ridicule continued, but so did Isa's quiet consistency. He never missed a morning of work, never complained, never asked Ramada to defend him. What no one noticed was how often Isa took calls in private, how he sometimes left early on certain days, returning later with a thoughtful look. How a man named Kofi Adeyemi occasionally greeted him with deep respect before disappearing again. Ramada noticed, but she didn't ask. Trust, she believed, was not about knowing everything. It was about believing in what you did know. And what she knew was this: she had married a man who stood firm when the world pushed back. What she didn't know was that the very people laughing at her wedding were unknowingly standing on the edge of a truth that would soon turn their mockery into shame. Married life did not soften the world's cruelty. If anything, it sharpened it. The first weeks after the wedding felt like walking through a storm with no shelter. Ramada noticed how quickly respect could disappear once people decided you had made the wrong choice. At school, conversations stopped when she entered the staff room. A few parents requested that their children be moved to another class, offering excuses that fooled no one. She married beneath her. Ramada overheard one teacher whisper, "What kind of values can she teach now?" Another replied. Ramada swallowed the humiliation and continued teaching. She smiled for the children. She corrected homework. She told herself that dignity was not something others granted, it was something she carried. Isa felt it too, though people rarely said things to his face. On his routes, some residents no longer greeted him. Others made jokes that landed like stones. "Hey, teacher's husband," one man shouted one morning. "You missed a spot." Isa bent down and picked up the trash without responding. At home, Ramada sometimes watched him silently, wondering how much he absorbed without showing. He never came home angry, never complained, but she noticed the lines on his forehead deepening the way he sat longer before speaking. One evening, as they shared a simple meal, Ramada broke the silence. "Does it ever get to you?" she asked. Isa looked up. "What?" "The way they treat you," she said softly. "Because of me." He put down his spoon. "They treated me this way long before you. That doesn't make it right," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it makes it familiar." She reached for his hand. "I don't want you to feel alone." He squeezed her fingers gently. "I don't." Despite his words, the pressure mounted. Aminata Diallo made sure of it. She invited Ramada to a small gathering one weekend. Fatu encouraged her to go. "Show them you're still part of this family," her mother said stiffly. Ramada hesitated, then agreed. She thought maybe, just maybe, things could soften. They didn't. The gathering was anything but small. Expensive cars lined the street. Music played loudly. Laughter spilled from the large house Aminata now called home. As Ramada entered with Isa, conversations paused. Aminata approached with a wide smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You came. You invited us," Ramada replied calmly. Aminata's gaze slid to Isa. "I didn't expect him to." Isa inclined his head politely. "Good evening." Aminata's husband Bubakar joined them, holding a glass of wine. "Relax," he said, smirking. "We don't bite." As the evening progressed, the insults became more subtle and more painful. Aminata loudly praised another guest's husband. "A real provider," she said, glancing at Isa. "Some men know how to elevate their wives." Bubakar laughed. "Not everyone has that ambition." Ramada felt her cheeks burn. She opened her mouth to respond, but Asa touched her arm lightly. "Let it go," he murmured. The final blow came when dinner was served. Isa was handed a plate different from everyone else's smaller set apart. "Sorry," Aminata said sweetly. "We didn't plan for extra." Ramada stood. "That's enough." Aminata raised an eyebrow. "Oh, sensitive now." Isa stood as well. "Thank you for the invitation," he said evenly. "We should go." As they walked out, laughter followed them. In the car ride home, Ramada broke down. "I should have known," she sobbed. "I keep hoping they'll see us differently." Isa drove in silence for a moment, then spoke quietly. "Some people only see what confirms their beliefs." She wiped her tears. "I'm tired, Isa." He nodded. "I know." The next day, Fatu confronted her. "You embarrassed us," she said sharply. "Walking out like that." "They embarrassed us first," Ramada replied. Fatu shook her head. "You're making enemies. This marriage is not your mistake to correct," Ramada said firmly. Fatu stared at her daughter, stunned by the strength in her voice. Meanwhile, another kind of trouble was brewing. One afternoon, Ramada returned home to find Isa unusually quiet. His phone lay face down on the table. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," he said quickly. Too quickly. That night she heard him step outside to take a call. She didn't eavesdrop, but she caught fragments through the open window. "Not yet," Isa said. "Timing matters. She needs to be ready." Ramada lay awake afterward, questions swirling in her mind. The following week, the city announced a new sanitation inspection. Supervisors appeared on Isa's route. Workers were suddenly under scrutiny. Some colleagues mocked him. "Teacher's husband better work harder," one joked. "Can't disappoint the wife." Isa said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, Ramada faced her own test. A parent filed a formal complaint. The head teacher called her into the office, his expression heavy. "They say your personal life is affecting your professionalism," he said carefully. Ramada's heart pounded. On what basis, they didn't specify, he admitted. "But you know how these things go." She left the office, shaking, anger and fear tangled inside her. That evening she told Isa everything. "I might lose my job," she whispered. Isa's jaw tightened. "Because of me, no," she said quickly. "Because of their judgment." He stood and began pacing, something he rarely did. "This has gone far enough," he said quietly. Ramada watched him. "What do you mean?" He stopped, took a breath. "I don't want you paying for my choices." She stepped closer. "Isa, listen to me. I chose this life. I chose you. I know," he said, "but choosing something doesn't mean enduring injustice forever." She searched his face. "What are you planning?" He looked at her, then away. "I promised myself I would wait. Wait for what she asked, for the right moment." That night, Ramada dreamed of standing on a stage, blinded by light, unable to speak while the crowd watched. She woke with her heart racing. Days later, an envelope arrived. It was addressed to Ramada's parents. Fatu opened it, frowned, then called Ramada immediately. "It's an invitation," she said slowly. "A formal one, to a citywide event, big names." Ramada was confused. "Why us?" "I don't know," Fatu replied, "but Aminata says it's important." When Ramada told Isa, he nodded as if he had expected it. "We should go," he said. She studied him. "You knew about this." He met her gaze. "I suspected." "Why?" she pressed. He smiled faintly. "Because some storms only pass when the truth steps into the light." Ramada didn't fully understand, but something in his voice made her uneasy and hopeful at the same time. The mockery hadn't ended. The struggle hadn't eased. But beneath the surface of their quiet endurance, something was shifting. And soon, the people who laughed the loudest would be forced to listen. The invitation became the center of every conversation. Fatu could barely hide her curiosity. She examined the envelope again and again, tracing the embossed letters with her fingers as if they might reveal their secrets. "This is not ordinary," she said, pacing the room. "City officials don't invite people like us to events like this." Aminata, of course, had her own interpretation. "It's probably connected to Boubacar," she said smugly over the phone. "His network is expanding. These things happen when you move in the right circles." Ramada listened without comment. She had learned that arguing with Aminata only fed her satisfaction. What unsettled Ramada wasn't the invitation itself. It was Isa's calm acceptance of it. He didn't ask questions. He didn't speculate. He simply said, "We'll attend," and went back to preparing for work. That calm felt different from his usual steadiness. It felt deliberate. In the days leading up to the event, pressure closed in from all sides. At school, the head teacher called Ramada in again. This time his tone was less careful. I've received another complaint, he said. It claims your husband causes distractions near the school. Ramada felt her hands tremble. My husband has never been near the school during work hours. I know, he said quietly. But perception matters. So does truth, she replied. He sighed. I'm not dismissing you, but be careful. People are watching. When she told Issa that night, he was silent for a long moment. They want you to feel small, he said finally. So you doubt yourself. She looked at him. What if they succeed? He met her gaze. They won't. His certainty startled her. Meanwhile, Karim Mensah reappeared, this time with open mockery. He found Ramada at the market, his voice loud enough for others to hear. I heard about the invitation, he said, grinning. Big event. You think your husband will be allowed inside? People slowed, pretending not to listen. Ramada lifted her chin. We were invited. Karim laughed. Invited as what entertainment? Her chest tightened, but she didn't react. You know, he continued, if you'd stayed with me, you wouldn't be begging for respect. She turned to him, her voice calm. I'm not begging. And I don't measure my life by what you think. Karim's smile faltered. You'll learn. That evening, Ramada sat alone, staring at the invitation again. Doubt crept in quietly like a thief. What if the event was another trap? Another stage for humiliation? Issa joined her, noticing her silence. You're afraid, he said. She nodded. I don't want another night like Aminata's party. He sat beside her. This will be different. You're sure? No, he said honestly. But some moments have to be faced. On the day of the event, Ramada dressed carefully, not extravagantly, just neatly. A simple dress, pressed and clean. Issa wore his usual clothes at first, then paused. I'll change later, he said. Into what she asked. He smiled faintly. You'll see. They arrived at the venue early. The building rose high against the sky, glass and steel reflecting the sun. Security stood at the entrance checking names. Fatu's eyes widened. This place, she whispered. This is serious. Aminata arrived shortly after, stepping out of Boubacar's car in a bold outfit, her confidence obvious. She spotted Ramada and laughed lightly. You actually came. We were invited, Ramada replied evenly. Aminata's gaze flicked to Issa. Let's see how long that invitation lasts. At the entrance, the guard checked Ramada's name. He nodded and waved her through. Then he looked at Issa. Your name, the guard asked. Issa Ouattara. Issa replied calmly. The guard frowned, checking the list again. His expression changed subtly, but enough for Ramada to notice. Please proceed, the guard said, stepping aside. Aminata's smile froze. Inside the hall buzzed with energy. Well-dressed guests mingled, waiters moved gracefully, cameras flashed. Ramada felt small, but not ashamed. Issa squeezed her hand once. Stay close. As they moved deeper into the hall, whispers followed. That's her, the teacher. Isn't that her husband? Boubacar joined them, drink in hand. I didn't expect you to get past the door, he said, chuckling. Issa met his gaze. Neither did I. The program began. Speeches about development, sustainability, progress. Ramada listened, trying to focus, but her heart beat fast. Then she noticed something strange. Several well-dressed men nodded respectfully at Issa as they passed. One even stopped briefly. Good to see you, the man said quietly. Issa nodded. Likewise. Ramada frowned. Do you know him? Issa smiled. In another context. Before she could ask more, the lights dimmed. The host stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, thank you for joining us for this important announcement. The room quieted. Tonight, the host continued, we celebrate a partnership that will reshape our city's approach to environmental management. A large screen behind him lit up with images, recycling plants, clean streets, workers in uniforms. Please welcome the chairman of EcoRise Africa Group. Ramada felt her breath catch. EcoRise Africa Group. She had heard that name at school, in the news, in conversations about major investments. Applause filled the hall. The host turned toward the side of the stage. Mr. Issa Ouattara. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Issa gently released Ramada's hand. I need to do something, he said softly. Her heart pounded. Issa. He smiled at her, not apologetic, not nervous, certain. He stepped forward. The applause grew louder as recognition spread. People turned, heads craned. Murmurs rose like a wave. Ramada stood frozen as Issa walked toward the stage. Fatu's mouth fell open. Aminata stared, color draining from her face. Boubacar lowered his glass slowly. Karim, standing near the back, laughed once, then stopped. Issa reached the steps, climbed them calmly, and took his place under the lights. The room fell silent. "My name is Issa Uetara," he said into the microphone, "and I'm honored to be here." Ramada's knees weakened. The world seemed to tilt. The man they had mocked, the man they had dismissed, the man they had reduced to a uniform and a job. He stood above them all, now not in anger, not in revenge, but in truth. And as Issa began to speak about dignity labor and unseen value, Ramada realized that everything they had endured had led to this moment. The storm was no longer approaching, it had arrived. The silence in the hall was not empty. It was heavy, thick with disbelief, pride collapsing inward, old judgments cracking under their own weight. Ramada stood frozen, her fingers trembling at her sides as Issa's voice filled the room. He spoke calmly, not loudly, not with anger. "For many years," Issa said, "I have worked in places most people choose not to see. Streets early in the morning, back alleys, waste sites, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand." A ripple moved through the audience. "I wanted to understand dignity," he continued. "Not the kind that comes from titles or wealth, but the kind that comes from labor, from waking up and serving a city that rarely says thank you." Ramada's chest tightened. She remembered every morning he left before dawn. Every night he returned tired but quiet. Issa went on. Eco Rise Africa Group was built on one belief that progress means nothing if it leaves people behind. That the hands we ignore are the same hands holding our future. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then growing. Ramada barely heard it. Her mind raced backward through every insult, every laugh, every look of pity. She looked around. Fatu sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the stage, tears forming but not falling. Aminata's confident posture had collapsed. She stared at Issa as if the ground beneath her had shifted. Boubacar's face was pale, his earlier smugness erased. Karim stood near the back, arms crossed, jaw clenched, refusing to clap. Issa finished his speech with quiet authority. "We honor work today," he said. "All work. Because value is not measured by how clean your hands stay, but by what you're willing to touch." The hall erupted into applause. Issa stepped away from the microphone. As he descended the stage, people rushed forward, executives, officials, journalists, hands extended, smiles offered, respect freely given. The same respect that had been denied to him for years. Ramada watched it all, her heart pounding painfully against her ribs. When Issa finally reached her, the crowd parted instinctively. "You knew," she whispered. He nodded slightly. "I hoped you would understand why I waited." Her voice shook. "All this time, I wanted you to choose me," he said softly. "Not what I owned." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You let them humiliate you." He looked at her with gentle seriousness. "I let the truth arrive when it could speak for itself." Fatu stood abruptly, pushing past people until she reached them. "Issa," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Issa bowed his head respectfully. "You knew what I showed you." Fatu flinched. Aminata approached next, forcing a laugh that sounded thin and brittle. "Well," she said, "this is unexpected." Issa met her eyes calmly. "So is the way you treated us." Boubacar cleared his throat. "Let's not dwell on the past. We're family." Issa's voice remained even. "Family does not humiliate." The words landed like a slap. Aminata opened her mouth, then closed it again. Nearby, Karim watched, his expression twisted with resentment. He finally stepped forward. "So all this was a test?" He scoffed. "You fooled everyone." Issa turned to him. "I hid nothing. You saw what you chose to see." Karim laughed bitterly. "You enjoyed watching us look down on you." "No," Issa replied quietly. "I watched you reveal yourselves." Karim said nothing more. The evening ended in a blur of attention Ramada had never experienced. People praised her strength, her patience. Some whispered apologies. Others avoided her gaze entirely. When they finally left the hall, the city lights seemed brighter than before. In the car, Ramada sat silently staring out the window. "I'm not angry," she said at last. "I'm just overwhelmed." Issa nodded. "You don't have to feel anything right now." She turned to him. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" He took a breath. "Because wealth changes how people love. I needed to know you love the man, not the position." She smiled through tears. "I loved you when you were invisible." He reached for her hand. "That's why you deserve the truth." But the truth did not bring peace immediately. The next days were filled with visits, calls, invitations. Fatou cried openly now, this time with regret. I was blind, she said one afternoon. I taught you to fear poverty more than cruelty. Ramada hugged her mother. We're all learning. Aminata avoided her for weeks. At school, attitudes changed overnight. Parents who had complained now praised Ramada publicly. The head teacher apologized awkwardly. You handled yourself with dignity, he said. We misjudged you. Ramada nodded politely, but something inside her hardened. Respect that arrived only after status felt fragile. One evening, she said as much to Isa. They treat me differently now, she said. Not because I changed, but because they know who you are. Isa looked thoughtful. And how does that make you feel? Uncomfortable, she admitted. Like the truth has conditions. Isa smiled sadly. That's the world we live in. She met his eyes. Then what do we do with it? He considered her carefully. We use it. Not to rise above others, but to lift. That night they made a decision together. Isa would no longer hide, but neither would he boast. EcoRise would expand its programs, but with a new focus: workers' dignity, education, and fair treatment. And Ramada would remain a teacher. You don't have to, Isa told her. I want to, she replied. I know what it means to be unseen. The revelation had shifted the balance of power, but it hadn't erased the past. Some apologies would never come. Some relationships would never heal. But Ramada understood something now. Love had not saved her from humiliation. It had given her the strength to survive it. And truth, when it finally arrived, had not changed who she was. It had only revealed who everyone else had been. The days after the revelation felt unreal, like waking up in a life that belonged to someone else. Ramada moved through them carefully, as if one wrong step might shatter the calm that had finally settled around her. Everywhere she went, eyes followed her, some filled with admiration, others with curiosity, a few with resentment thinly disguised as respect. At school, the change was immediate and uncomfortable. Parents who had once avoided her now lingered after class, smiling too brightly. Madam Ramada, one woman said, clasping her hands together, we are so proud of you. Proud of what Ramada wondered, that she had endured, or that her husband was no longer poor. The head teacher called an emergency staff meeting. His tone was warm, apologetic. We must acknowledge our mistake, he said. Ramada has always been a dedicated teacher. Ramada sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. She accepted the words, but they felt late. That afternoon, a colleague pulled her aside. Everything must be easier now, the woman said lightly. With your husband's position. Ramada smiled politely. Teaching is still teaching, but inside, something ached. At home, Fatou hovered constantly. She cooked more, cleaned more, spoke less. One evening as they washed dishes together, Fatou finally spoke. I was afraid, she said quietly. I thought poverty was the worst thing that could happen to you. Ramada dried her hands. What did you think humiliation would do to me? Fatou's eyes filled. I didn't think you'd survive it. Ramada turned to her mother. I survived because I had love, not money. Fatou nodded slowly, as if relearning something she had forgotten long ago. Aminata, on the other hand, stayed silent. Days passed, weeks. When she finally called, her voice was tight. Let's meet, she said. Just us. They met at a cafe Aminata often visited. Once Ramada would have felt out of place there. Now the waiters watched her with new interest. Aminata sat stiffly across from her. I didn't know, Aminata said abruptly. About Isa. Ramada stirred her tea. You knew what you chose to see. Aminata bristled. You could have told us. Ramada looked up. Would it have changed how you treated him? Aminata didn't answer. After a moment she sighed. I was wrong. The words sounded rehearsed. I'm sorry, Aminata added, forcing them out. Ramada nodded once. Thank you. There was no warmth in the exchange, no relief, just closure. Meanwhile, the city buzzed with news of EcoRise Africa Group's expansion. Isa was everywhere, on television and newspapers, at conferences, always composed, always careful. He spoke about workers, about sanitation staff, about dignity. But with attention came pressure. Advisors pushed for faster growth. Politicians wanted endorsements. Sponsors suggested cleaner images. One evening, Kofi Adeyemi visited their home. You have momentum, Kofi said to Isa. But momentum attracts hands that want to steer. Isa nodded. I expected that. They will use your story. Kofi continued. Your marriage, your humility, it sells. Ramada listened quietly. After Kofi left, she turned to Issa. Are you ready for that? He considered her. Are you? She thought of the children at school, of the parents who had once doubted her, of the whispers that had nearly cost her everything. I don't want to be a symbol, she said. I want to be useful. Issa smiled. Then we agree. Their first joint decision came sooner than expected. A sanitation workers' strike erupted on the outskirts of the city. Men and women who collected waste daily were protesting unpaid wages and unsafe conditions. News cameras arrived quickly. Issa insisted on going in person. No speeches, he told Ramada. I need to listen. She went with him. The workers were surprised when they arrived, not because Issa was the chairman, but because he stood among them without entourage or distance. I've worn your uniform, he said simply. Tell me. They did. Stories spilled out injuries, ignored hours, extended promises broken. Ramada watched as Issa listened without interrupting. No defensiveness, no excuses. That night changes were announced, immediate ones. Some board members protested. You're setting a precedent, one warned. Issa replied calmly. That's the point. But not everyone approved. Karim Mensah appeared again, this time on a talk show. Let's be honest, Karim said to the camera. This whole thing was a performance, pretending to be poor. It's manipulation. Ramada watched the clip online, her stomach tightening. Do you want to respond? She asked Issa. He shook his head. Truth doesn't need a microphone every time. Still, the comment stung. At school, a student asked her bluntly, Madam, are you rich now? Ramada smiled gently. I was rich before. I just didn't know it. The child frowned, confused. That evening, Ramada sat alone, the weight of everything pressing down on her. Issa found her staring at nothing. You're quiet, he said. I'm thinking, she replied, about all the times I doubted myself. He sat beside her. Doubt doesn't mean weakness. I doubted us, she admitted. There were moments. Issa nodded. I know. She turned to him. Why did you stay so calm? He smiled faintly. Because I had already lost everything once. Fear doesn't scare me anymore. She reached for his hand. I'm glad you waited. He squeezed her fingers. So am I. Despite the progress, tension remained. Some former friends avoided Ramada, now uncomfortable with her new visibility. Others sought her out, hoping for favors. One afternoon, a parent approached her with a request. Perhaps your husband could help my business, the man said casually. Ramada's expression hardened. My husband doesn't trade favors. The man laughed awkwardly and walked away. That night, Ramada lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The truth had changed the world's response, but it hadn't erased its intentions. She realized then that the real test wasn't surviving humiliation. It was surviving success without losing herself. The next morning, she woke with clarity. At breakfast, she told Issa, I want to start something. He looked at her curious. What kind of something? A program, she said. For children of sanitation workers, education support, meals, stability. Issa's eyes lit up, not with surprise but recognition. I was hoping you'd say that, he replied. As they planned together, Ramada felt a quiet strength return. Not because people respected her now, but because she knew who she was before and after the truth. And this time the world would not define her value. She would. The program began quietly. No press release, no cameras, no speeches. Ramada insisted on it. If we announce it before it breathes, she told Issa, it will become about us, not about them. Issa agreed. They started with one school near a sanitation workers' housing area. Ramada visited after classes, sitting with parents beneath a mango tree, listening more than she spoke. Many were cautious at first. We've heard promises before, one woman said, her arms folded tightly around her chest. Ramada nodded. I know. Another man asked bluntly, Is this charity? No, Ramada replied. It's partnership. That word changed the tone. Within weeks, meals were arranged for children who often fainted from hunger. Simple supplies arrived: books, notebooks, uniforms. Nothing excessive, nothing flashy, but it made a difference. At school, Ramada noticed changes quickly. Children who once struggled to stay awake now raised their hands. Laughter returned to classrooms that had felt heavy for too long. Issa watched it all with quiet pride. This is what power should look like, he said one evening, almost invisible. But invisibility never lasts. A journalist discovered the program through a parent. An article followed, then another. Soon calls began pouring in. Some were supportive. Others were strategic. A politician requested a meeting. This initiative aligns with our vision, he said smoothly. Perhaps we could collaborate publicly. Issa declined politely. A corporation offered sponsorship on the condition that their logo be displayed prominently. Ramada shook her head. Not like this. The pressure to compromise grew. At the same time, resentment simmered beneath the praise. At a family gathering, Boubacar pulled Issa aside. You could help us, he said quietly, with contracts, connections. Issa met his gaze. I help where there is need, not entitlement. Boubacar's smile stiffened. Careful. People don't like being refused. Issa nodded calmly. Neither do I. Aminata watched from across the room, unease written on her face. Later she approached Ramada. You've changed, she said. Ramada smiled faintly. No, you're just seeing me clearly now. The comment stung more than Aminata expected. Meanwhile, Karim Mensah's bitterness deepened. He wrote opinion pieces online, questioning Issa's integrity, suggesting the revelation had been a publicity stunt from the start. People like him don't wake up poor by accident, Karim wrote. This was planned. Ramada read the words late one night, her chest tightening. Does it bother you? Issa asked gently. She nodded. Because part of me wonders if people believe him. Issa took her hands. They don't have to believe me. They only have to watch what we do. Still, the attacks took their toll. At school, one parent confronted Ramada. So this is all fake? The woman asked sharply. Your husband playing poor Ramada met her eyes. My husband chose humility. That's different. The woman scoffed and walked away. That night, Ramada felt exhaustion seep into her bones. Not physical, but emotional. Sometimes she admitted to Issa, I miss when no one cared. He smiled sadly. So do I. But retreat was no longer an option. EcoRise expanded its worker protection citywide. Contracts were revised, safety standards enforced, wages adjusted. Some managers resisted. You're spoiling them, one complained. They'll expect too much. Issa replied evenly. They already give too much. The boardroom grew tense. Kofi Adeyemi warned him privately. You're making enemies. Issa nodded. I know, and you're exposing yourself. Issa smiled faintly. I've been exposed for years. The turning point came when a senior official attempted to pressure EcoRise into cutting costs quietly. Issa refused. Within days, an investigation was announced into EcoRise's finances. Headlines flared. Ramada felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This is retaliation, she said. Issa exhaled slowly. I expected it, but what if they ruin everything she asked? He looked at her steadily. Then we rebuild. For the first time since the revelation, Ramada felt fear grip her tightly. What if we lose it all? She whispered. Issa placed his forehead against hers. Then we'll still have what we started with. She closed her eyes. Each other. Yes, he said softly. The investigation dragged on for weeks. Rumors spread. Support wavered. Some donors withdrew. Some parents worried the program would end. Ramada stood before them one evening, her voice steady despite her racing heart. We don't know how this will end, she said honestly, but what we've built doesn't disappear because of fear. The parents listened. Then one man stood. We'll help, he said simply. Others followed. Volunteers stepped forward. Teachers offered time. Workers contributed what little they could. The program didn't just survive, it rooted itself deeper. When the investigation concluded, EcoRise was cleared. Quietly, no apology came from those who had pushed it, but the damage they intended never landed. Karim's articles lost traction. His voice faded into the noise. One afternoon, Ramada received a letter. It was from a former student now grown working sanitation like his father once had. Because of your program, he wrote, my sister is finishing school. I want to thank you. Ramada read the letter twice. Tears blurring the words, she showed it to Issa. This, she said, is why. He smiled, eyes soft. I know. That evening, as the sun set behind the city, Ramada realized something profound. The revelation had not been the climax of her story. It had been the beginning of a harder chapter one, where dignity had to be defended daily, not just revealed once. And this time she wasn't standing alone in the storm. She was standing with purpose. The second invitation arrived without ceremony. No embossed envelope this time, no grand messenger, just an email forwarded late one night to Issa's phone, followed by a single printed letter left at their gate the next morning. Ramada found it first. She stood in the doorway reading the heading twice before her breath caught. National Development and Sustainability Summit, Abuja. She carried the letter inside slowly, as if moving too fast might make it disappear. Issa, she called. He was in the kitchen tying his shoes for an early meeting. When he saw her expression, he untied them again and came to her side. "They want us there," she said, handing him the letter. Issa read it carefully. His face remained calm, but Ramada noticed the slight tightening at the corner of his jaw. "This isn't just a summit," he said quietly. "It's a stage." She nodded. "For what?" "For choosing sides." The invitation made no mention of EcoRise alone. It spoke of national alignment, strategic partnerships, shared visions, words that sounded generous but carried weight. Ramada sat down, the letter resting in her lap. "Do we have to go?" she asked. Issa didn't answer immediately. He sat across from her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "If we don't," he said finally, "they'll decide our position without us." That answer didn't comfort her. News traveled fast. By afternoon, Fatou had called 3 times. "Abuja," she repeated, disbelief mixing with excitement. "This is big, very big. It's just a meeting," Ramada replied. Fatou laughed nervously. "You say that like it's nothing. Do you know who attends these things?" Ramada did. That evening, Aminata showed up unannounced. I heard she said, stepping inside with forced enthusiasm. "National Summit. That's impressive." Ramada studied her cousin's face. The old confidence was gone, replaced by something uncertain. "It's work," Ramada said. Aminata nodded too quickly. "Of course. Work." There was an awkward pause. "You know," Aminata said eventually, "people are talking differently now." Ramada met her eyes. "People always talk." Aminata swallowed. "They say you're powerful." Ramada almost laughed. "No," she said softly. "They say my husband is." Aminata looked down, ashamed. The days leading up to the summit were tense. Advisors debated strategy. Kofi Adeyemi warned Issa repeatedly. "This room will be political," he said. "They will praise you publicly and corner you privately." Issa nodded. "I won't make promises I can't keep." "That may cost you," Kofi said. Issa met his gaze. "Then so be it." Ramada packed quietly the night before they left. She folded her clothes carefully, choosing simplicity over display. When she reached for a dress she rarely wore, Issa stopped her gently. "Be yourself," he said. "That's why you're going," she smiled faintly. "That's what scares me." Abuja was louder, faster, sharper than Ramada remembered. The summit venue buzzed with energy, security checks, cameras, polished smiles. As they entered the main hall, Ramada felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, anticipation. Issa was greeted immediately. Hands shook, names exchanged, compliments flowed freely. Visionary, disruptor, leader of the future. Ramada stood slightly behind him, observing. Then someone addressed her directly. "You must be Ramata Toure," a woman said warmly. "We've heard about your work." Ramada blinked. "My work with the education program," the woman continued. "Remarkable initiative." Ramada thanked her politely, surprised. The opening sessions passed quickly, speeches layered with ambition, panels heavy with promise. Then came the closed-door meeting. Issa was invited in, Ramada was not. She waited outside, seated beside a wide window overlooking the city. Time stretched. Memories surfaced uninvited, waiting outside offices, waiting for approval, waiting to be seen. An hour passed. Then 2. Finally, Issa emerged. His expression was unreadable. They didn't speak until they were alone in the car. "They offered us support," he said finally. Ramada waited. "Funding, protection, influence. And the cost?" she asked quietly. Issa exhaled. "Alignment, silence when necessary." Her chest tightened. Silence about what? About labor disputes, about oversight, about who benefits. She looked away, the city lights blurring. "And what did you say?" she asked. Issa's voice was firm. "I said no." Ramada closed her eyes. Relief and fear colliding inside her. They won't forget that she said. "I know," Issa replied. The consequences came quickly. Within days, whispers began again, this time at a higher level. EcoRise contracts faced delays. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. Approvals stalled. At school, Ramada felt it too. A funding request for her program was suddenly under review. That night, she sat with Issa on the balcony, the city humming below. "Did we make the wrong choice?" she asked softly. Issa didn't hesitate. "No. But it's getting harder," she said. "Again." He turned to her. "Harder than before," She thought back standing alone on marble steps watching him humiliated, being judged for loving a man the world dismissed. No, she admitted, different. Isa smiled. That's progress. The next morning, Ramada woke to a message from a parent. They're cutting the meal supply. What do we do? Her heart sank. She called Isa immediately. We'll cover it, he said without pause. But for how long, she asked. For as long as it takes. She sat down heavily, overwhelmed. Later that day, Fatu called again, her voice tense. People are saying you're difficult, she said, that you don't cooperate. Ramada closed her eyes. Since when is integrity difficult? Fatu sighed. I just don't want you hurt. I've been hurt, Ramada replied gently. This is different. That evening, Karim Mensah resurfaced online emboldened. Refusing partnership is arrogance, he wrote. No one builds alone. Ramada read the post, then closed her phone. Do you want to answer him? Isa asked. She shook her head. No, I want to work. And so they did, quietly, relentlessly. When official channels closed, communities stepped in. Teachers volunteered. Local farmers donated produce. Workers took turns delivering meals. What started as a program became a movement. At the next EcoRise board meeting, one director spoke carefully. You're losing favor, he warned Isa, but gaining loyalty. Isa nodded. I'll take loyalty. That night, Ramada stood before a room full of parents and children. We don't know what tomorrow brings, she said honestly, but today we show up. Applause filled the room, not loud but steady. As she looked out, Ramada realized something had changed again. Not in the world. In her, she no longer needed approval from family, from power, from systems built on condition. She had survived mockery. She had survived revelation. Now she was learning to survive resistance. And this time, she wasn't afraid. The pressure didn't explode all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as procedure. Letters arrived with polite language and sharp intent. Meetings were postponed due to scheduling conflicts. Emails went unanswered. Calls were returned days later, if at all. What had once been momentum slowed into resistance thick enough to feel. Ramada sensed it first at the school. A district officer arrived unannounced, clipboard tucked under his arm, eyes scanning the classrooms with practiced disinterest. He asked questions that sounded routine but landed like accusations. Attendance records. Curriculum alignment. External influence, Ramada answered calmly. But when he left, her hands shook. That afternoon, the head teacher called her in again. They're auditing programs linked to private funding, he said, avoiding her eyes. They want assurances. Assurances of what Ramada asked, that you're not advancing personal agendas. Ramada almost laughed. Feeding children is an agenda now. He sighed. Be careful. At home, Isa was dealing with his own storm. EcoRise's board meeting that week was tense. Several directors sat stiffly, papers stacked neatly in front of them as if order could mask discomfort. We've received inquiries. One said carefully. From regulatory bodies. Isa nodded. About what? Your refusal to align with national partners, another added. They're concerned about your independence. Isa folded his hands. Independence is not defiance. It can be interpreted that way, the first replied. Silence settled over the room. Kofi Adeyemi spoke up. EcoRise is compliant, transparent, profitable. Yes, the director said, but not cooperative. Isa's voice remained steady. If cooperation requires silence about injustice, then we're not aligned. The meeting ended without resolution. That night, Ramada and Isa sat together, the space between them heavy with unspoken worries. They're testing how much we can endure, Ramada said quietly. Isa nodded. They always do. She looked at him. What happens if they push harder? He met her gaze. Then we push back with truth. The push came sooner than expected. A formal notice arrived the next morning. EcoRise was required to suspend several city contracts pending review. The language was clinical. The impact was not. Workers called. Supervisors panicked. Schedules collapsed. Isa gathered his team immediately. No layoffs, he said firmly. We'll restructure. But the costs, a manager began. We'll absorb them. Isa replied. Ramada watched from the doorway, pride and fear mixing inside her. Later that day, she received a call from a parent. They say the meals might stop, the woman said, voice trembling. Is it true? Ramada closed her eyes. Not today. But she didn't know about tomorrow. That evening, Ramada found Isa on the balcony staring out at the city. The lights below flickered like uncertain stars. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm calculating," he replied. She stepped closer. "And what do the numbers say?" He turned to her. "That we can survive this, but it will cost." "Money," she asked. "Time," he said. "Energy, reputation." She nodded slowly. "Then we pay it." He searched her face. "Are you sure?" She smiled faintly. "I've paid worse." The next week, the media shifted its tone. Articles that once praised Issa's humility now questioned his judgment. Is Eco-Rise too independent leadership or lone wolf power without accountability? Karim Mensah seized the moment. In a televised debate, he leaned forward confidently. "This is what happens when personal emotion replaces governance. You can't build systems on sentiment." Ramada watched from home, fists clenched. "He's turning people against us," she said. Issa shook his head. "He's turning people against himself." But doubt spread anyway. Some donors hesitated. Some partners withdrew. The pressure tightened like a vice. Then came the hardest blow. Ramada's program lost its largest supplier. No explanation, just a polite email. She sat at the table, staring at the screen long after the words blurred. "Issa," she whispered. He came immediately, reading the message once, then setting the phone down. "We'll find another way," he said. "But the children," she began. "We'll feed them," he said firmly, "even if I have to sell assets." She looked at him sharply. "No." He frowned. "Why not? Because this can't be just us." "Ah," she said. "If it is, they win." He considered her words. The solution came from an unexpected place. Zainab Kone arrived one afternoon, breathless but determined. "The market women are organizing," she said. "They heard about the meals." Ramada blinked. "Organizing how?" "They're pooling food," Zainab replied. "Small amounts, daily." Ramada's eyes filled with tears. Word spread quickly. Farmers donated produce. Bakers offered day-old bread. Transport workers volunteered delivery. What had been a funded program became a community effort. When officials returned to inspect, they were met with rows of parents, teachers, and workers standing together. "This is unauthorized," one officer said. A woman stepped forward. "This is survival." The officer hesitated, unprepared for resistance without anger. That night, Issa received a call. A senior official requested a private meeting. "This is your chance," Kofi warned. "They may offer compromise." Issa nodded. "I'll listen." The meeting took place in a quiet office far from cameras. "You've proven your point," the official said, "but this doesn't have to be a battle." Issa listened. "We can restore contracts," the man continued. "Stabilize operations." Issa waited. In exchange, the official added, "We ask for discretion." Issa leaned forward. "Discretion about what?" The man smiled thinly. "About where to look and where not to." Issa stood. "No," he said simply. The official's smile faded. "Think carefully," I have Issa replied. "For years." When Issa told Ramada, she didn't speak at first. Then she nodded. "I'm proud of you," she said. He smiled tiredly. "I'm tired." "So am I," she admitted. "But I'm not done." The next day, Ramada was invited to speak not at a summit, but at a small teachers' conference. She hesitated, then agreed. Standing before a modest crowd, she spoke plainly. "I married a man the world dismissed," she said, "not knowing who he was, only knowing how he treated me." She paused. When the truth came out, people changed, but dignity shouldn't wait for revelation. The room was silent. "If you want justice," she continued, "stand with it when it's inconvenient." The speech was recorded, shared, passed quietly from phone to phone, not viral, not loud, but steady. And in that steadiness, Ramada felt something shift again, not in policy, not in power, but in people. The resistance had not broken them. It had revealed them. And as the city watched, two people refused to bend a different kind of influence, began to grow, one that didn't ask permission. The shift didn't announce itself with sirens or headlines. It arrived quietly, carried by people who had been watching from the edges, waiting to see if Ramada and Issa would finally bend. They didn't. One morning, Ramada arrived at school to find a small crowd gathered near the gate. Parents, a few sanitation workers, even two shop owners from the market. They weren't protesting. They were waiting. A woman stepped forward. "We heard you were speaking today," she said. Ramada hesitated. "I'm teaching." The woman nodded. "We know. We just wanted to walk you in." Ramada felt her throat tighten. As they moved together toward the building, others joined, quietly, naturally, no signs, no chants, just presence. Inside, the district officer was already there, clipboard in hand. He watched the group enter, his practiced neutrality faltering. "This is irregular," he said. A man replied calmly, "So is hunger." The officer said nothing more. That afternoon, the school board convened an emergency meeting. Ramada was asked to attend. The head teacher looked nervous. "There's pressure," he admitted, "but there's also support." Ramada listened without interrupting. "They want you to step back from the program," he said finally, "temporarily." Ramada met his eyes. "No." A murmur rippled through the room. "You're refusing," a board member asked. "I'm choosing," Ramada replied. "The children don't pause their hunger for politics." The room fell silent. At EcoRise, the atmosphere was equally charged. Issa stood before his leadership team, reviewing figures that no longer told comforting stories. Losses were mounting. Contracts remained frozen. "We need to decide," one manager said. "Scale back or stand firm." Issa looked around the room. "Who here believes dignity is scalable?" No one spoke. "Then we stand firm," Issa said. Later that day, Kofi Adeyemi arrived with news. "There's movement," he said quietly. "Not from the top, from the middle." Issa raised an eyebrow. "Municipal leaders?" Kofi continued. "Departments. They're tired of the stalemate." Issa nodded. "Tired enough to act," Kofi smiled slightly. "Tired enough to talk." The meeting took place in a modest conference room. No cameras, no titles displayed. A woman spoke first. "We've reviewed the audits, thoroughly." Issa waited. "There's nothing to hold against you," she said. "But pressure remains." Issa leaned forward, from where she exchanged glances with the others. "Above us." Issa nodded. "Then we all know the problem." Another man cleared his throat. "We can't change the system overnight." Issa met his gaze. "I'm not asking you to." Silence settled. "What are you asking?" the woman asked. Issa's answer was simple. "To do your jobs." The conversation didn't end in agreement, but it didn't end in dismissal either. That evening, Ramada returned home exhausted. "I feel like we're standing in the middle of a river," she said, "and the current keeps changing." Issa poured her a glass of water. "As long as we don't let it carry us away." She looked at him. "What if it does?" He smiled faintly. "Then we swim." The next blow came from an unexpected direction. Aminata Diallo appeared at their door. Ramada opened it cautiously. Aminata looked different, smaller, stripped of performance. "I need to talk," she said quietly. They sat in the living room, the air thick with history. "I was invited to something," Aminata began. "A private gathering. People were laughing, saying this would all end soon." Ramada listened. "They said you'd break." Aminata continued, "That Issa would compromise, or collapse." She swallowed. "And I realized something." Ramada waited. "They never talked about helping anyone," Aminata said. "Just winning." Ramada studied her cousin's face. "Why are you telling me this?" Aminata's voice cracked. "Because I don't want to be on the wrong side anymore." Ramada nodded slowly. "Sides are chosen by actions." Aminata left without asking forgiveness, without offering excuses. That same night, Issa received a call. The voice on the other end was formal. Controlled. "Mr. Uetara, the man said the suspension of your contracts will be lifted." Issa closed his eyes briefly. "On what terms?" "No new terms." The man replied. "Existing agreements will resume." Issa said nothing. "There will be no public statement," the voice added. "No acknowledgement." Issa exhaled. "Understood." When he told Ramada, she didn't smile immediately. "So they fold quietly," she said, "and pretend nothing happened." Issa nodded. "Power rarely apologizes." She looked at him. "Do we accept?" Issa met her gaze. "We accept the work, not the silence." The next day, EcoRise trucks returned to the streets. Workers cheered quietly, cautious but relieved. At the school, meal deliveries resumed, this time supported by both community and restored supply. The district officer returned, clipboard absent. "There will be no further audits," he said stiffly. Ramada nodded. "Good." That afternoon, Karim Mensah released a final post. "Looks like compromise won," he wrote. The response was not what he expected. Comments questioned his credibility. Others pointed to the resumed programs, to the workers back on the streets, to the children eating again. Karim deleted the post within hours. That evening, Ramada stood with Isa on the balcony, the city breathing below them. "It didn't end with applause," she said. "No," Isa replied. "It ended with work." She smiled. "I prefer that." He looked at her thoughtfully. "They wanted us to choose comfort." She nodded. "We chose consistency." A knock sounded at the door. It was Zainab, smiling wide. "They're asking for you," she said. "The parents." Ramada followed her outside. A small crowd waited, not large, not loud. Children stood at the front holding drawings. Sanitation workers stood behind them, uniforms clean but worn. A boy stepped forward and held out a picture. It showed two figures standing side by side, hands linked. Around them were small houses, a school, and a bright sun. "For you," the boy said. Ramada knelt, tears streaming freely now. "Thank you." Isa watched from the doorway, his chest tight. In that moment, Ramada understood something fully. The greatest reversal wasn't that the powerful had retreated. It was that the invisible had stepped forward. They hadn't won a battle. They had changed the ground on which battles were fought. And as night fell, Ramada felt a quiet certainty settle in her bones. The storm had passed, but the work would continue, and this time they were not alone. The city didn't celebrate their quiet victory. There were no parades, no medals, no official statements acknowledging mistakes made or pressure applied. Life simply resumed. Trucks moved again. Schools received supplies. Offices reopened their doors. To many it looked like nothing had happened, but Ramada felt the difference everywhere. It was in the way parents greeted her now, not with forced smiles, but with steadiness. In the way sanitation workers stood taller when Eco-Rise vehicles passed. In the way people paused before speaking, as if remembering how quickly judgment could betray them. One afternoon, Ramada returned home early and found Isa sitting at the table, papers spread out before him. "You look busy," she said. He smiled faintly. "Planning." "For what?" "For the next phase." She sat across from him. Already he met her gaze. Stability is temporary. Systems need reinforcement. They worked late into the night, mapping programs that didn't depend on a single sponsor or official approval. Worker education funds, health clinics, scholarship pathways for children whose parents had always been considered replaceable. At the same time, the people who once mocked them struggled with their own reckonings. Fatu had changed quietly, visibly. She visited Ramada more often now, not to advise, but to observe. One evening, she watched Ramada prepare lessons at the table and spoke softly. "I used to think success was loud," Fatu said. "Expensive." Ramada didn't look up. "And now," Fatu sighed, "now I think it's calm." She hesitated. "I hurt you." Ramada set her pen down and met her mother's eyes. "Yes," Fatu nodded. "I don't know how to fix that." "You don't fix it," Ramada replied gently. "You carry it differently." Fatu wiped her eyes. "I'm trying." Aminata's transformation was slower. She kept her distance at first, attending gatherings without speaking much, watching conversations instead of leading them. When she did speak, her words were careful. One afternoon, she approached Ramada at a community meeting. "I heard you're expanding the program," Aminata said. "Yes," Ramada replied. Aminata nodded. "If you need help." "Organizing." Ramada studied her cousin's face, searching for performance. Finding none, she nodded once. "We'll see." Karim Mensah, however, did not change. His presence faded gradually from screens, from conversations, from relevance. His attempts to reclaim attention grew sharper, then quieter, then desperate. When he finally approached Ramada in person, it was almost anticlimactic. They crossed paths outside a bookstore. He looked thinner, less sure. "I didn't think it would last," he admitted abruptly. Ramada waited. "I thought he'd crack." Karim continued. "That you'd come back." She met his gaze. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because that's how these stories usually go." Ramada nodded. This one didn't. Karim laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than me now?" "No," she said calmly. "I think I'm done measuring myself against you." He had no response. As the weeks passed, invitations returned, this time framed differently. Panels, workshops, consultations. Isa accepted selectively. "We don't need visibility," he told Ramada. "We need alignment." At one conference, a young worker approached him after a session. "They say you used to collect waste," the man said, awe in his voice. Isa nodded. "I still do, just differently." The man smiled. "It gives us hope." Hope, the word followed Ramada home that night. Do you ever wish, she asked Isa, that we'd chosen an easier path? He considered the question. Easier for who? For us. He smiled. On hard days, maybe. On honest days, no. She leaned into him. I used to think love was something that protected you from pain. And now, he asked, now I think it teaches you how to carry it. Their work grew deeper, not wider. Instead of chasing numbers, they focused on continuity, training local leaders, sharing ownership, making sure programs survived beyond them. At a small ceremony marking the first class of scholarship recipients, Ramada stood before a group of children and parents. We didn't build this alone, she said, and we won't carry it alone. Applause rose, quiet, sustained. Isa watched from the side, pride softening his features. Afterward, a reporter asked him, do you regret hiding your identity? Isa answered without hesitation, no. Why not? Because it showed me who believed in dignity without proof. That night, Ramada sat alone, reflecting on the past year. She thought of the girl she had been standing quietly while others decided her worth, of the woman she had become standing firmly without needing permission. Isa joined her, sensing her thoughts. What are you thinking? He asked. She smiled. That being mocked didn't break me. He nodded. It shaped you. She turned to him. And you? He smiled softly. It freed me. Together they looked out over the city. The lights were uneven. Some neighborhoods bright, others dim. Work remained. But for the first time, Ramada felt no rush, no urgency to prove anything to anyone. They had endured humiliation. They had resisted pressure. They had refused to trade values for comfort. And now, quietly, steadily, they were building something that didn't need applause to exist. The people who once laughed now watched from the sidelines. Not because Ramada and Isa had risen above them, but because they had chosen to stand where dignity lived and invited others to join. The morning came without ceremony. No headlines, no urgent calls, no sudden crisis demanding attention. Just sunlight slipping through the curtains and the familiar sound of the city waking up vendors, calling out prices, engines coughing to life, footsteps moving with purpose. Ramada lay still for a moment, listening. For the first time in a long while, her chest felt light. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Isa, and stepped onto the balcony. From there she could see the sanitation trucks moving through the streets below, steady, unremarkable, essential. Men and women climbed on and off them with practiced ease, their work invisible to most but not to her, not anymore. When Isa joined her, handing her a cup of tea, she smiled. You didn't sleep much, he said. I was thinking, she replied. About what? About how strange it is. Ramada said slowly that peace feels so ordinary. Isa chuckled softly. That's how you know it's real. Their days had settled into a rhythm, busy, purposeful, grounded. EcoRise continued its work without drama. The education program had grown roots in communities strong enough to sustain it without constant oversight. Teachers trained teachers, parents organized parents, children learned, ate, dreamed, and Ramada returned to what she loved most, teaching. She stood before her classroom every morning, chalk in hand, voice steady. The children didn't care who her husband was. They cared that she noticed when they were tired, when they were hungry, when they were proud of their work. That afternoon, a new student joined her class, a quiet girl with wary eyes. Ramada knelt beside her desk. You're safe here, she said gently. The girl nodded, unconvinced but hopeful. Later that week, Ramada received a letter. It wasn't from an official, or a donor, or a journalist. It was from a sanitation worker. Madam, I used to hide my uniform on my way home. My children were ashamed. Now they wait for me outside. Thank you. Ramada folded the letter carefully, tears blurring the ink. She showed it to Isa that evening. This, she said softly, is the ending I didn't imagine. Isa smiled. Endings are overrated. She laughed. True, not everyone found closure so easily. Fatu still carried her regret quietly, but now she listened more than she spoke. She volunteered occasionally, helping with meal distribution, avoiding praise. One day she said to Ramada, I thought protecting you meant controlling you. Ramada took her mother's hand. Protecting me meant trusting me. Fatu nodded, tears in her eyes. Aminata's life changed in subtler ways. She no longer boasted, no longer led conversations. Instead, she learned to stand back to support without spotlight. It was uncomfortable but honest. As for Karim Mensah, he drifted into obscurity, chasing attention that no longer followed him. When Ramada thought of him now, there was no anger, only distance. One evening, as Ramada and Isa attended a small community celebration, a young man approached them hesitantly. "Sir," he said to Isa, "is it true you once worked with us?" Isa nodded. The young man smiled. "Then, maybe, I can be more too." Isa placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already are." The words settled deeply. As the celebration continued, Ramada watched the people around her, workers, parents, children, teachers. None of them perfect, all of them necessary. She remembered the laughter that once followed her, the humiliation that had burned into her bones, the loneliness of standing by a man the world dismissed. And she realized something important. Those moments hadn't been wasted. They had taught her how fragile respect could be and how powerful dignity was. Later that night, Ramada and Isa walked home together beneath a quiet sky. "Do you ever regret marrying me?" Isa asked suddenly, half smiling. She stopped, turning to face him fully. "Never," she said without hesitation, "even when they mocked me, especially then." He searched her face. "Why?" "Because I learned who I was," she replied, "and who I wasn't willing to become." He smiled, eyes warm. Then it was worth it. They stood there for a moment, hands entwined, the city breathing around them. The story that began with mockery didn't end with revenge. It ended with something quieter, stronger, purpose. And as Ramada looked ahead, not to applause or recognition, but to work yet to be done, she felt ready, ready to teach, ready to stand, ready to love without fear. Because in choosing dignity over approval, she had gained something no one could take away: her worth. This story reminds us that true value is rarely loud. It doesn't always arrive with applause, titles, or approval. Sometimes it walks beside us in worn clothes, misunderstood and underestimated, asking only to be seen for what it is. Ramada was mocked not because she chose poorly, but because she chose differently. And Isa did not reveal his power to shame others, but to prove a deeper truth, that dignity exists long before recognition arrives. In life, many people will judge you by what you have, not who you are. They will respect you only after success, forgetting how they treated you before it. But character is revealed in those earlier moments when no one is watching, when kindness costs something, when standing firm means standing alone. This story teaches us that love is not a shield against hardship. It is the strength that helps us carry it. That success without integrity is empty, and integrity without reward is still priceless. And most importantly, it shows that when you refuse to trade your values for acceptance, you don't just change your own life, you quietly change the world around you. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever been judged or underestimated for a choice you believed in? How did you respond? Share your story in the comments. And if this message touched you, please subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because stories like these remind us that humanity still matters.